All right, welcome to this video series. This series is going to cover the first part of being a designer, which is part of the Iste Standards for educators. This first designer part is going to be focused on visual and web design, and then another unit we'll be talking about learning design in particular. So the topics for this series, we're starting with just some basic background about digital literacy and learning theory. We'll do some basic visual design principles, and then I'll talk a little bit about some technical steps for creating a website where you can illustrate your digital literacy and visual design competencies. Okay, so part one, digital literacy and learning theory. We're going to talk about why we're talking about design, and then some basic learning theory that helps us make decisions for visual design. So there's a lot of different reasons to focus on design. And right now we're just going to focus on two reasons. One is that it's part of developing digital literacies. And the other is that it's important when you're creating an environment or materials or anything to support learning. So when we talk about digital literacies, we're talking about what students need to participate in an increasingly digital society, where the type of media they are creating and seeing is not just books that go one way. It's websites and videos and social media. They need to be able to use this type of media, understand it, and also create. Because of part of the digital society is that we're not just consuming media all the time, we're actually creating it as well. And there's certain dynamics that go along with that. There's some reading that you'll do or have hopefully already done that goes into that in a little more depth. When we look at the Iste Standards, this is the Iste Student Standards, we talk about being a creative communicator. And that is about clearly express themselves creatively using a variety of platforms, tools, styles, formats, and digital media appropriate to their goals. So actually choosing the platforms, the text, the images, the video, the sounds, all that goes into becoming a creative communicator. And so it's important that we all work on developing these skills. The other reason that we're talking about design is that when we teach, in a way, we're creating or designing a learning environment. And we need to be able to do that effectively with digital tools. That includes creating visual things like websites and worksheets and handouts and all those things that are important for supporting learning. We need to be able to communicate clearly. We need to be able to create effective learning materials, and then also creating resources for students and parents, like websites or other spaces where people can come and get information. So this goes with the Educator Standards for Designer. And for this video series, we're mostly focusing on the explore and apply instructional design principles. And that's part of our visual design principles we're talking about how to engage and support learning. The other two we're going to address in a different video. So I keep talking about design. What is design? Design is about shaping meaning. When we design something, we're actually interpreting it or understanding it in a certain way and trying to help other people understand it in a certain way. So it's about being deliberate about the decisions we make so that we shape some type of meaning or understanding. So this is a quote from Nancy DeRate. She wrote this book called Slideology that is an excellent resource if you want to learn how to develop effective slides and presentations. And she said this: practice design, not decoration. Don't just make pretty talking points. So we're not just going to change colors and fonts because it's pretty. We're doing it for a purpose, to communicate something. Instead, display information in a way that makes complex information clear. Design is about trying to communicate something in a clear way. And that happens through the choices we make as we design. And concerning visual design, there's a lot of different choices we make. So when I think about visual design, I'm thinking about combining text and images primarily to communicate some meaning. We have to choose a font, the size of our font, how it's aligned, the shapes and colors and pictures we use, where things are in relationship to each other, and the order we put things in. These are all choices we make whenever we design some type of visual format, whether it be a website or a worksheet or anything like that. So I just wanted to briefly talk about some learning theory that can help us make these decisions, because if design is about making decisions, there should be a reason we're making certain decisions. And so these are some I'm going to briefly cover, although this first one, cognitive load, I'm going to talk in a little bit more detail because it might be a new idea to some of you. So again, we're talking about making choices through applying learning theory. And you read about different types of learning theory. They're not right or wrong. They each just present a different perspective on what it means to learn. And so this cognitive load theory is primarily based on cognitivism. Okay, so cognitivism is a lot about the thoughts we have, the types of memory, short-term, long-term memory. It's basically based off the model of our brain as a computer where we store information. So just so you know that this cognitive load theory is based in cognitivism, and there might be reasons to violate this theory if you're using a different perspective. However, it's generally something that works in all situations. So cognitive load is about taking the intrinsic cognitive load. That means it's like the difficulty of a subject matter. So whether calculus is difficult or reading is difficult or some theoretical ideas is difficult. And then we look at the extraneous cognitive load. That's things that we add to the situation that makes it more difficult to understand. And if we add too much extraneous cognitive load, and the intrinsic cognitive load, the difficulty of the subject, is already hard, that can overload our working memory and make it difficult to learn. So what we want to do is, especially when something's complicated, we do not want to increase the extraneous cognitive load. We want to keep as many things as simple as possible so that we don't overload this working memory. Here's a graphic I found that was an interesting perspective on this. It talked about different causes of cognitive load and then consequences. So we talk in design, we talk a lot about inconsistency or confusing displays. Those are things we can control using the visual design. Other things like people being in a bad mood or not having the prior information they need might be somewhat out of our control, but it's something important to be aware of. When there's a lot of extra cognitive load, things feel really hard and unfamiliar. It can actually feel untrue and bad, which is important to know. So this means that when we're designing for media for learning, we need to try to keep things as clear as possible so that we reduce that extra cognitive load. Keep it simple, and then we want it to be pleasant. And that has to do with things looking good and being balanced, because that increases our mood, and a good mood is better, will decrease cognitive load. So that is a super quick overview of cognitive load. Hopefully you've done some other reading that also helps you understand it. So just a couple other brief ideas about learning theory that's applicable to visual design. We want to group or cluster ideas. So it helps people understand things better if we keep common ideas together. So we can actually do that visually. We want to help students access prior knowledge, and we can do that actually through the use of images or certain types of text. We want to help students connect what they're learning to their personal identity. And this comes down to the types of images you choose to use. If you're using images of students that look like your learners, or if they don't look like your learners, trying to help your learners connect what they're seeing to who they are. And then finally is the learning experience. And this goes back to having that pleasant experience where you're actually enjoying the learning, which then also decreases cognitive load, it increases comprehension and retention. So there you go. That's in a nutshell some learning theory from visual design and some reasons that we're focusing on design. The next video, we'll talk more specifically about some visual design principles that draw upon these learning theories.